Barbara, I don't know how many days and nights this team has spent thinking about these things and ways in which the former president may have had transgressions of the law, or at least of norms. But there is stuff in this redacted affidavit that is about lives, that is about danger, that is about national security. We're past the point of this was carelessness or this was bad record keeping. There's something in here that has led people to believe that this could actually be the thing that Donald Trump is prosecuted for.
Yeah, I think there are some things that are disclosed in this affidavit that makes me agree with you that it's more likely today than it was before that there would be a prosecution. One of the things we now know is that as far back as May of 2021, the National Archives was involved in a dialogue with Donald Trump to get these documents back. So he's been on notice for all that time that he had documents that didn't belong to him, that were classified, that contained national defense information that was lying around Mar-a-Lago. We learned today also that they found these documents not just in the storage room, but in something called the residential suite, in something called the 45 office, in something called the Pine Room. I mean, what is that? The place where people have a drink after they play golf? I don't know. But it's, beyond careless, reckless. And we also learned the nature of these secrets. It includes signals intelligence, human intelligence. That's the stuff where we've got assets in foreign countries being managed by case officers of the CIA. And FISA material, that's information that is collected that by definition includes counterintelligence information and terrorism information. So these are some really, really sensitive documents. They're lying around all over the place at Mar-a-Lago, and Trump is on notice for more than a year that he has these things and needs to return them. I can't see how he evades criminal charges unless there's something in those redactions that is exonerating.
Jill Wine-Banks, you have watched everything that Donald Trump has done in his presidency, but you also watched something that a different president did, and there's a Watergatiness to this in that the bumblingness of it, the intermixing of documents with I don't know what, hankies and underwear and other things, it makes it seem like it's not as serious as it is. But what Barbara just said is that there is stuff in here that had no business being in the president's house, and it's been there for 18 months. We have no idea what those NDIs, what that information about human intelligence, what those FISA documents, who's seen them, where they might have been, who might have photocopied them. We just don't know. It seems dumb, but this might be the most serious thing yet.
This is very serious, and I say that not just as the Watergate prosecutor, but as the former general counsel of the Army, familiar very much with human intelligence, signal intelligence, and national security. And this is stuff that some of it was in the hallway going to the public pool. Anybody could have gone past it. It wasn't locked up appropriately. And besides the national security implications, all of this belongs to the American people, to the National Archives. Even the things that are just presidential records that aren't classified should not be at Mar-a-Lago. They are not Donald Trump's documents. They are the people's documents. They are there for history to study. And so it's really a shame that he has those. And one of these laws would bar him from ever running for office should he be convicted of that particular offense. But all of them are very serious offenses, and all of them put at risk our national security. And he knew he had them, as you pointed out. He's known for a long time. The National Archives has been saying, please return our documents. You have classified documents. They removed classified documents. They removed 15 cartons of them. And now they just took away 25 cartons more after he said, well, there's nothing left. I've given you everything. That wasn't true. They obviously got recent information from someone that caused them to be alarmed and to go in there.
It's lost on no one that Jill's pin tonight is a padlock. Mark, let's talk about some of these things, because there's a general view amongst people in intelligence and political critics of the intelligence operations in the United States that stuff is overclassified. And there's some argument that at lower levels of stuff that otherwise exists in the public domain, someone would have testified about it in Congress, but these documents remain classified, and sometimes they don't get unclassified in enough time for people and researchers and journalists to get access to them. That's not what we're talking about in some of these cases. There are markings on some of these things that were taken from Mar-a-Lago that I am unfamiliar with, and I was not familiar with until today. They are at a high level of intelligence that does possibly lead to exposure of people like intelligence gatherers, spies, people who work in other countries.
No, exactly. So I have spent 30 years challenging the classification system of the U.S. government to declassify information, because even the most senior government officials will testify before Congress that probably up to 50% of information is overclassified. But I also represent some of the most covert operatives who work for our government, both assets, foreign assets who work overseas, and also our people who, if they were caught in their foreign countries, could be executed. And what this affidavit showed us in particular, we knew about, okay, SCI information, sensitive compartmented information was received. That's bad. But then to read about these dissemination controls on the documents, such as HUMINT, HCS, human intelligence, as Barbara talked about, that's talking about my clients who could be potentially at risk, or the FISA material from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court, which is dealing with trying to counter foreign agents who are operating here in the United States. To think that these records were willy-nilly floating around Mar-a-Lago for a year and a half is unthinkable.
Damage assessment. Are we talking about Donald Trump and the damage he's done to the institution by taking things like this? Or are we talking about what Mark Zaid and I were just talking about, that there are people whose lives might be in danger tonight because information that should never have been anywhere close to the public was sitting around Mar-a-Lago for 18 months, apparently?
Real lives are at risk. I'm talking U.S. troops, most importantly, because in the affidavit they referred to national defense information. That means U.S. troops, their movements, their locations, and that has been jeopardized by Donald Trump. It also means, as was referenced, sources, people who help the U.S. government obtain or achieve our national security objectives. And just tonight, the New York Times is out with a new piece about a CIA memo regarding the loss of human sources. I can't comment, on that memo, but the story at least highlights the concern that if Donald Trump has this information about U.S. sources, it jeopardizes their lives. So these are real lives that are at risk. And again, Ali, what is so interesting here, or so telling, Donald Trump, 4 years as president, was the first president in modern history who chose not to receive an intelligence briefing when every other president, and Joe Biden did and does receive an intelligence briefing. So why would he take that information now? We can only conclude the worst because he's acted the worst in the past. He leveraged U.S. military aid to Ukraine to get dirt on Joe Biden. So you have to assume he only wanted that information to help himself if he ever needed.
I know you can't tell me about details about things you know, but one of the things we're all learning about, that people like you know about, are the names, the markings on some of these documents. We've all heard classified, and there, as we were discussing, issues about whether there's overclassification of documents. But in the list of classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago, written in the affidavit, which means the last round of stuff, 67 documents marked as confidential, 92 documents marked as secret, 25 documents marked as top secret, 184 documents there. And a lot of them had designations that, like I said, I've never heard of before, but describe whether they're human intelligence or signals intelligence or things like this. Again, this is not accidental memorandum souvenir stuff that would find its way out of where it's normally supposed to be, right?
And Ali, think about, you're absolutely right, and think about the Russia war on Ukraine and our ability to stay one step ahead of them. That was because of the exquisite intelligence that our community, CIA officers, NSA, intelligence officials had been able to collect and share with our allies and helped us stitch together. That was the glue. Our intelligence was the glue that brought NATO and allies all over the world together. So if we lose our ability to do that because Donald Trump is holding on to this information, it's not even if he is to compromise the information, it's the perception that sources have that maybe their ability to work with us or their cooperation with us is not as secure as they thought. That could also have a chilling effect on future sources.
Lindsey Graham tweeted today that this falls well short of any meaningful transparency. We're going backward, not forward, when it comes to explaining this raid on former President Trump's home. Lindsey Graham's a lawyer. He's a guy who's dealt with a lot of foreign governments, so it surprises me because, again, the affidavit proves that this wasn't a raid, that they had asked for this information over and over again. Karl Rove said on Fox, seems like the Department of Justice kept asking for this. So he's spinning a story here, but what would Lindsey Graham be talking about when he says this is not meaningful transparency? Does he mean he didn't want as much stuff redacted? Wanted more stuff out there?
It's just politics, Ali, and we're 80 days out from the midterm elections, and this could not give the American people a clearer choice. One side, the Democrats, is advocating for people, the people who are affected by Donald Trump's recklessness, the people that are benefited by our advocacy for them and the legislation we've passed. And the other side is entirely interested in politics. And they've given us this frame because they have shown themselves in the way that they're willing to fall over themselves and do anything to defend Donald Trump, that if they win the majority this fall, they will go to Congress and fight entirely for Donald Trump. And Democrats have shown with this and what we've done that if we are given the majority again, we will go back to Congress and fight for people. And it could not be clearer. And this just shows that in a very, very pronounced way.
Well, do you think any of this affects that outcome? Obviously, there have been some wind shifting in the last few weeks that are making some people think that control of Congress and the Senate is now a toss-up, when earlier this year they thought Democrats wouldn't control either house. Do you think this kind of thing has any effect? Is there anybody out there in America who's saying this defending Donald Trump's actions here is a bridge too far?
Yes, because it shows Democrats, we're fighting for women's reproductive freedom. We're fighting for your kids to be free from gun violence in school. We're fighting for paycheck freedom and lowering the cost of prescription drugs. They have no agenda. They don't have the contract with America in '94. They don't have repeal and replace in 2010. Their entire agenda is that they're going to bring chaos to Washington because they're going to focus entirely on fighting for Donald Trump. We're going to fight for you. I think that choice is clear, and we're going to win with that choice.
There was some good news on inflation today. According to a Commerce Department report that's closely watched by the Federal Reserve, consumer prices rose less in July than they did in June. Last month, they were up 6.3% compared to a year earlier, and that's down from the 6.8% in June. But all of this is still far higher than where inflation needs to be, and trying to get record inflation under control while avoiding a recession is a hard thing to do. Today, the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell issued a stark warning that the Fed's plan to fight inflation is likely to cause, quote, some pain.
While higher interest rates, slower growth, and softer labor market conditions will bring down inflation, they will also bring some pain to households and businesses. These are the unfortunate costs of reducing inflation. But a failure to restore price stability would mean far greater pain.
So avoiding that far greater pain means a potential small uptick in unemployment, and economic growth may slow down. Borrowing costs will continue to rise as the Federal Reserve raises its benchmark interest rate. I want to introduce Talman Joseph Smith. He's a New York Times economic reporter. Tal, good to see you. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm a longtime fan of your reporting on the economy.
Well,
so
you are very kind. And by the way, anybody who knows anything about the economy knows that if the Federal Reserve Chairman says that interest rates are going to go up, some things are going to happen. The market dropped 1,000 points. The Dow dropped 1,000 points today, which leads me to believe sometimes the market's just stupid. But there shouldn't be all that surprising, right? Inflation's there. The Fed's got to fight it. Unfortunately, they don't have a ton of tools. They can increase interest rates.
Right. And so we saw the market fall today. The market can go up, it can go down. We've seen that all year. It's been very choppy. In the end, as usual, particularly the mega indices like the S&P 500 and the Dow, they're going to eventually go up. The real stakes today, and why this was a seminal moment in monetary policy, is that the Fed chair essentially, as you said, admitted that they have a limited set of tools. And so at the end of the day, the Fed has increased the risk premium. Government bonds are now creating higher yields. And so that makes some more risky investments less attractive. It also means that the borrowing cost for a lot of businesses has gone up. And, we've seen SPACs, NFTs, some of these more speculative investments that were very hot last year come down. We've seen mortgage rates go up. many of the channels that they have available to them have already been used up. And essentially what is left, as the Fed chair referenced there, when he said some pain, is really having these effects of high interest rates or higher interest rates hit the labor market via unemployment.
Right. And you're right about the fact that over time, every 10-year period, markets go up, and that will ultimately fix itself. And if you've got enough years, you're fine. The problem is inflation's actually a tax on people, right? You pay more for things that you were buying before. Interest rates are the way you fight it, but it's the same problem. You're paying more, particularly if you're a borrower. They're trying to avoid a recession. Did you get some sense that that'll be successful?
It's really up in the air. We certainly have seen the panic about there being a potential recession decline since, say, late spring. We've seen major indicators come in suggesting that consumers, particularly on the higher end, the upper middle class and the affluent, are holding up well, whereas maybe those on the lower end that have seen more of their income go to food and to gas, they've struggled a bit more. It's also just one of the cases that our economy, in terms of share of spending, you see the middle class, the upper middle class, and the rich contributing more to consumer spending, which is 70% of the economy. So the fact that we have folks that saved up during the pandemic and now are still using those savings to produce economic growth, that's good overall. And the problem, however, is, like you said, there is a double whammy in which inflation hits those at the bottom the hardest. And yet interest rates tend to affect those who are the last in when the economy is growing and will be the first out when the economy has peaked and starts to tumble.